Well, I've had three challenges today. First of all, it's been raining, and I came from Wokingham on my motorbike, so apologies, I did get a bit damp. If I've got a bad case of helmet hair, I'm sorry about that. The second challenge is, of course, I'm actually third, so some of the things may sort of be looked at from a slightly different perspective over again, but let's look at it from that point of view. And thirdly, I had a quick look through who's here, and I know that you're all a pretty informed group. You wouldn't be here if you didn't know something about this. So I've actually got two big objectives. I hope I'm not going to do any teaching to suck eggs. That's the first one. And I'm not going to give you the gospel according to Waitrose, because I want to talk about principles and I want to talk about personal observations and thoughts, which I hope will resonate with you. They might amuse you a little bit, but really provide some fuel for the debate, which is the most important thing for today. Just pick up on one comment, and that's the earlier comments about emotion. Absolutely concur that when you're talking at a business level, then hard fact wins. But of course, think about all of those people that you're really talking to out there in public land, and actually they all operate on emotion because that's the default position for human beings. So you have to take that hugely into account in whatever plans you've got. Now, my little bit today is about engagement with the supply chain, and that does beg the question of just what is the supply chain? I'm a retailer, and I consider the retail process as part of that because shops are just suppliers to customers. We're just part of that. We may have got huge scale, or some of us have got huge scale, some of us haven't, Waitrose hasn't. We've got massive diversity, and we've all got identities which are subtly different, but they're part of everyday living. But at the end of the day, they're all only as good as the products they sell. So thanks very much to Unilever and other companies for providing fantastic products that appeal to customers. And the more complex the proposition, the more difficult it is to find replacements for failed relationships or businesses that fail for other reasons. So if your range is differentiated in any way, the degree of differentiation is and the degree of mutual dependence develops in proportion to the degree of that differentiation. Because if you move away from the values of your business and away from your customers, then you're going to lose trade. On the other hand, your supplier, who's created all this fantastic range, which is all around what you can sell, can't really sell that anywhere else. So actually there is a bit of a mutually assured destruction model here going on. You both have to work together. And it doesn't really matter whether those values are cheap and cheerful or whether they are green and ethical. And I think actually there's a big debate about whether those are mutually exclusive. I personally believe they are absolutely not. So you need them and they need you. And this is just as compelling as the traditional trading model. I have been, and I slightly remark about the hard-nosed buyer image that was portrayed of me earlier on. Absolutely not. I'm an absolute pussycat, or used to be, when I was talking to my suppliers. Because I've been a buyer in both worlds. When I joined Waitrose 25 years ago, we were a trading organisation. We would knock people out for 5 pence on a kilo of spuds and have them back in the next day. We'd have 5 suppliers of potatoes in a business that was a quarter the size. Now we've got one supplier and we have this mutually assured destiny model. The mutual model actually is harder. And the reason is because you have to take responsibility. So you no longer can go, I don't really care if you make half your staff redundant. Actually, I've now got a responsibility to make sure that your business is sustainable as well. Now, if there's one thing that adds complexity and differentiation, it is the whole business of corporate social responsibility. Whether that be human commitments about fair trade and labour standards, or environmental commitments about the sustainability of production and supply. Now, my first point is that developing a position on CSR takes time and investment, and both parties need to have confidence in the future. They need to be able to see a long enough term future to justify the investment, even if it's just intellectual investment. But but usually it involves financial investment as well. So that really poses the question of why bother? I mean, you know, really, why bother? Why do you put yourself through all of that pain and work when you don't have to, or you don't think you have to? Well, I believe the answer is that you actually have no choice unless you hold the most short-term of views. Now let's consider the basic rules of retailing. You must offer what the customer wants at a price that they find acceptable. So not being able to sell something because it no longer exists or becomes frighteningly expensive doesn't really tick many boxes. And yet that is exactly the position with fish. The best way to ensure cheap, plentiful fish is by ensuring the sustainability of the supply. And the best way to ensure shortages and high prices is to strip the seas. And who knows this more than anybody? The fish and processing industry. And guess who has got the most rigorous policies in this area? Is it the customer? No. It's the industry, including retailing, because the customer, there are whole areas of purchasing where they've got little or no idea, possibly all areas of purchasing actually, where they've got little or no idea what they're buying. But think inside your own head, when was the last time you asked about the fish that you buy in a restaurant? One or two of you may have done it once in a while as an experiment, but I would guarantee most of you don't ever do that. So actually that's you know, you can't look at that from that point of view. So this leads on to my second point. When a customer knows about something, they might make a choice to the one that they make now, but that is a really, really unsafe strategy. Firstly, the job of educating customers about matters which are highly complex in numbers which make any difference to purchasing patterns is astronomically huge. You've all seen that diagram, and I mean, it's like a funnel. It starts and it's 55 million across at the top, and it nicks down to probably, I don't know, a couple of handfuls of key movers and shakers, including the retailers and major companies. You know, so 55 million to, I don't know, 30, say. What are you going to do? What they want is solutions and to be able to trust that the right things are being done so they can get on with their lives. Or they don't care. Now, actually, that's not true. They do care. They do care when they're prompted, and they do care when they understand the issues, but it's just such a hard job to drive that kind of behaviour change on that way. So in my view, it is my view, relying on customer pull on ethical issues is a cop-out. Customer pull works well for market need, but does not work well for perceived altruistic activity. Key word there is perceived. It cannot deliver the required change in any timescale that has any meaning. The responsibility, and this is where we come back to the supply chain, the responsibility lies back in the supply chain with the retailer, the processor, and the producer. So, just for a moment, let's forget about CSR issues. It's a competitive world. What business prospers through ignoring the basic rules of cost reduction and efficiency? And that's where we find a happy situation. Saving resources also saves money, and every business must be motivated to do that, or eventually they will have to or go out of business. So economic sustainability absolutely depends on sustainable activity within the supply chain. So we've established that you need to work with people for a long time to deliver products with complex criteria. And the responsibility for change lies with the supply base, not the customer. And that good CSR is at the root of good economic sustainability. What's not to do? Well, knowing you have to do it is a big part of the battle, but then knowing how to make it happen is the next. Now, I used to work with the Met Office. I didn't actually work in the Met Office. I used to work on behalf of Waitrose alongside the Met Office on weather-related ordering. Now, you can tell from the fact that we actually don't have weather-related ordering that that was not hugely successful. Why? Well, I'll tell you a quick story, because the Met Office, if any of you work for the Met Office, you'll know this, they run a multiple set of computer programs, multiple weather models in parallel based on the prevailing conditions. And what actually happens is that these models have a trajectory which diverge with time. So they just assess the probability of the weather based on the degree of, on how much agreement or divergence these models show. So practically it means there's a fair degree of certainty what happens tomorrow. Let's hope it's not raining again. Bit less the day after, fair bit less the day after that, and probably pretty much no idea at all really what's going to happen in a week. Now the lead time for most products to be ordered, produced and all the rest of it is within the week's sort of scale. So actually you've already got a problem. Your lead time on your forecasting doesn't match your lead time on your demand. So we have a model that deals with what is happening now and produces a very divergent view of the future based on the different models, each of which is likely to occur as each other. So what we need to do is to turn this on its head. We need to define the future, what we want to see, and then take all the prevailing conditions and shape them to converge on this future vision. A diverse present is formed into a unified vision of the future, which means each strand has to change in a different way to form a convergent, not divergent trajectory. Now, this is the route to successful engagement because everyone needs to know what they've got to do. It's about that vision. Now, this is pretty much leadership textbook stuff, so I'm not going to dwell on it because you know that kind of stuff, and I don't want to teach you to suck eggs. But the question is, how do you do it? And I think this is the really hard part, and it's simply because of the time required. We spend an awful lot of time at supplier conferences, grower meetings, producer groups, all of these kind of points of contact with our supply base, with partners within the business, etc., etc. But of course, it's not the only thing that's being talked about. So it's about how do you raise that priority? How do you get the time? How do you get the impact at those groups? So what we've done is we've created a framework for our CSR based around 4 pillars. And that framework is called the Waitrose Way. And fundamentally, the 4 pillars are championing British, which is about our support for British agriculture. It's about treading lightly, which is all of the stuff that we do with the environment. It's about treating people fairly, which is about our responsibilities to the community, charities and fair trade, that type of thing. And it's about living well, which is all about healthy diet, more exercise, keep your customer alive as long as possible so that they can carry on spending money with you. So that is the home, that is the wrapper. The Waitrose Way is the wrapper that is the home of the vision that I'm talking about, and it acts as a focus for the engagement of all the various stakeholders. Now, I'm not going to tell you much about that today because we're talking principles. So the first thing you need to do, and the first thing you do need, is something that brings it all together in a way that works for you. Waitrose Way for us wouldn't work for you because you're not part of Waitrose, but something like that. But perhaps the most important thing is that it must work for the audience and the stakeholders that you're trying to engage. So this is about, I'm going to be the third person who's going to mention the word lens, don't worry. This is where we look at this through lens. So visualise this massive great big cloud of stuff going on, which is CSR policy and all of its kind of wonderful ramifications. Actually, what we need to do is to shine a light from different angles. And so, for example, I won't talk to a lorry driver about carrier bags. What do they want to know about carrier bags for? Except, as a customer, they might want to know a little bit about carrier bags. And I won't talk to a checkout person about the new biofuel we're testing out, because what do they want to know about that for? You know, it's about what's relevant. So, you need to set out some clear expectations, and it often works well if that goes in hand with some reward. And a good example of how we've done this practically is we have set out a set of environmental targets. They are around the key measurables of energy reduction, waste and water. A very strong echo with the Unilever principles there. But they're also linked to an award process that will give credit where credit's due. And in fact, we're about to go through that process very shortly. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to give a great deal of credit to those suppliers that have entered and made the appropriate steps forward. What we've also done is we've included the Waitrose Way in job descriptions and in business planning documents and embedded the whole concept into the raids and races. You know what raids and races are? The responsibilities, accountabilities, information, decision-making sort of grids that you get in every business. And we've engaged the branch and head office partners in this whole thing in that way. And it's working. People get it. They get the concept, they get the idea that they have to apply principles, not rules. that the Waitrose way is not a toolkit for action in itself, it's a philosophy and a toolkit for thought. Now it may be, I'm nearly done now, it may be something about a co-owned business, but it has achieved the wonderful resonance and momentum that we are feeding through all the conferences and journalism and so forth. Now I guess for customers, they just need to know that we're doing it all for them. For partners, that's the people working in the Waitrose business, that they need to know they're the people that have got to do it. And for our suppliers, that the products that sell best are those that meet our brand values, and that we will be in business next week, next year, and next century because we understand sustainable business. And I just want to make one final point, and that is about success. People like to do things that work. And I think the considerable commercial success that the Waitrose brand enjoys, in spite of the doommongers who thought that it would fold at the first whiff of a recession, proves that it does work, that some form of sustainable and ethical position on the high street does work. It sells more product, and it holds out the probability of success in the future. And for anybody in the supply base to know that you've got a successful business model, that what you're doing is working and that it's going to happen for a long time so you can plan, is one of the biggest ways you can get the engagement. Thank you.